details on the El Salvador arrangement? Yes or no?
Which Salvador arrangement?
Your agreement that you've made with them about.
What agreement? The president of El Salvador agreed to take in 250 gangbangers, and we sent
funding
them.
details we have not gotten. We need to see what the costs are.
Well, we haven't funded that. We've provided them law enforcement assistance. I know you
Okay.
just claimed that we cut all this law enforcement assistance. We provided El Salvador and other countries law enforcement assistance. They have the right to spend that money any way they wish. But they did us a big favor. They took 250 dangerous trained out. We didn't deport any U.S. residents. No U.S. residents
I'm
were
not going to
reported.
argue with you on that.
Well,
point.
it's not an argument, but don't say we.
Senator Murray.
Thank you very much, Chair Graham. Senator Schatz, welcome to your new role. I look forward to working with both of you. Secretary Rubio, I am deeply concerned that you have overseen a systemic campaign to dismantle USAID, impound billions of dollars that this committee actually provided, and unilaterally remake the Department of State without the slightest bit of concern that you lack the authority to do that without Congress. It has created chaos, it's caused preventable deaths across the globe, and it has undermined American leadership. As Ranking Member Schatz noted, what you've done is outright illegal, a complete violation of bipartisan appropriation laws, the Impoundment Control Act, and the Anti-Deficiency Act. Within hours of taking office, President Trump halted all foreign aid in flagrant defiance of the law. Now, under your watch, Secretary Rubio, that freeze was implemented with chaos and cruelty. And then you illegally shuttered USAID, placing everyone on leave, halting life-saving work, literally locking people out of the building and out of their devices, even in dangerous corners of our world. You paid people not to work, abandoned our partners across the globe, and chaotically recalled global staff, putting more than 1,600 Americans who served our country abroad in limbo. And when you shut down the USAID payment system, you even refused to pay for services provided before the illegal freeze. You fought all the way to the Supreme Court, against paying for services U.S. businesses already rendered with funding that Congress already provided. And I know you know, Mr. Secretary, but you lost. And I assume you need the reminder because to this day, you have not made all the payments that are required by our nation's highest court. And as a result, American companies continue to lay off American workers. And by the way, you do continue to lose in court, including just yesterday over your move to illegally replace the U.S. Institute of Peace Leadership, and in recent cases over international broadcasting. Now, eventually, Mr. Secretary, you sent Congress notice of your intent to collapse the USAID into state. Only you didn't consult with this committee. That's required by law. It came without justification, also required by law, and it came long after USAID was reduced to rubble. So sadly, disregard for our laws and values, to me, has sort of become a pattern of your tenor, revoking visas when someone writes an op-ed you don't like, or reaching a secret deal to use taxpayer dollars to jail U.S. residents in a notorious foreign prison, no due process, or pointlessly leaving food assistance to rot in storage. Actually, in Dubai, we now have 500 tons of high-energy biscuits that expire in July. They're bought, they're shipped, they're stored, all at taxpayer expense. But you've condemned them to waste, and that is one example of many. Now, another pattern that I'm deeply worried about is transparency. We have pressed you for information. Our staffs have sent you countless emails and briefing requests, so we can do our job here. There are hundreds of unanswered requests and no effort to address them. And Mr. Secretary, that's got to change. Even your plan to reorganize the State Department came with no information on the 270 offices you are moving to eliminate, the proposed layoffs, or how USAID would be merged into state. I won't ask you whether impounding billions of dollars is legal. It is not. I won't ask you whether it's efficient to pay people not to work or fire them without determining staffing needs. And I won't ask you if cutting 91% of our counter-narcotic and law enforcement programs make us safer, abruptly abandoning agreements with allies makes us stronger, or ceding our global leadership to China makes us more prosperous. Of course not. We know that. We have worked together for years in a bipartisan way to advance U.S. interests and fund those programs. So with respect to my colleagues, how long are we going to sit here and watch this silently? Are we going to roll over as Trump tramples our laws and undermines our U.S. leadership, burns down what we have spent decades building, and let millions of people across our globe suffer and die? Or are we going to stand up, push back, assert our constitutional power of the purse? And to my colleagues on both sides, this is the moment to decide whether this committee continues to be a powerful bipartisan force, a force that I think we've all been proud of for a very long time, a force that is focused on safety and economic strength and national security, focused on leading the world in research and development and countering China and others with our soft power and our military power. Every single member of this committee knows what we are risking by letting this administration tear down so much. on USAID and other programs. We can always talk about how we can make things work better and other reforms. I don't think any of us are opposed to any of those considerations. We have been doing that in a bipartisan way for a long time. But that's not actually what Trump's fiscal year 2026 budget proposes. Mr. Secretary, I know you would like to give a 5-minute speech back to me, but I only have a few seconds left, and I do need some information from you. As I said, we have asked and have not gotten. Can you tell me, will you share the text and details with my staff of your agreement with El Salvador and any other similar arrangements, including the funding details that we need to have?
Well, first, I'd like to respond to your 7-minute speech, which is primarily, I disagree like 99% of it. It's just not true. We've done nothing that's illegal. We've been in over 600 briefings to Congress. We've asked questions. We've answered questions repeatedly. We get hundreds of questions a day. We respond to them as quickly as possible. And your characterization of the moves that we
Mr.
made
Secretary, I
were
would
false.
just tell you, we are here because we need the information so that we can write our budget and on a bipartisan.
Well, you'll have the
move
information
forward.
you need to write a budget.
Okay, so will we get the details on the El Salvador arrangement? Yes or no?
Well, which Salvador arrangement?
Your agreement that you've made with them about.
What agreement? The president of El Salvador agreed to take in
My
250
understanding,
gangbangers,
there's
and we sent
funding
them.
details we have not gotten. We need to see what the costs are.
Well, we haven't funded that. We've provided them law enforcement assistance. I know you
that-
just claimed that we cut all this law enforcement assistance. We provided El Salvador and other countries law enforcement assistance. They have the right to spend that money any way they wish. But they did us a big favor. They took 250 dangerous trained out. We didn't deport any U.S. residents. No U.S. residents
I'm
were
not going to
reported.
argue with you on that.
Well,
We
it's
have-
not an argument, but don't say we deported U.S. residents because we didn't. I don't deport anybody.
I'm not asking.
But we didn't deport U.S.
I'm asking
residents.
you whether we can see the details of the arrangements, including the funding details.
I'm giving you
as
the
an
details.
appropriation.
The arrangements are we provide law enforcement funding to El Salvador, among other countries. How they choose to spend that money internally is up to them.
No.
But I can tell you.
Can you give me the details on the 200-plus offices you're proposing to
Sure, we've
eliminate?
provided
We need that. Can I get your commitment to
Sure,
give
of
us
course.
those?
It's part of our reorg.
How about the details and justifications of your proposed rescissions from programs you claim are out of alignment with administration priorities? Are we going to get the details of that, funding priorities?
On rescissions and impoundment and things of this nature, that's obviously an OMB function, and I would talk to them about that in regard to what's going to go on with that money. I can tell you the contracts we canceled, and I can list to you the contracts we canceled and the rationale why, because I went through
Can you
them
get
myself.
those to us like today? So
The contracts?
Yes, and the funding arrangements that you've made. That's what I'm asking for.
Funding arrangements with who?
For any of the rescissions, for any of the funding, for any of the multiple congressional directives that you have given out so that we as an appropriations committee can make our funding decisions.
Sure, you're going to have all that information
you.
when you
I
put together a
appreciate
budget.
Thank you. I enjoyed that.
It began with a charge delivered like a gavel strike. Senator Patty Murray accusing Secretary Marco Rubio of outright illegal acts. A systemic campaign to dismantle USAID, to impound billions that Congress had already appropriated, to remake the State Department without authority or consent. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The facts, or the allegations, did the shouting for her. From the first seconds, the frame was unmistakable. A clash, not just of personalities, but of constitutional powers. Murray spoke of a freeze on foreign aid within hours of taking office, of a shutdown that locked development professionals out of their buildings and their devices, of life-saving work halted mid-mission. She described bills left unpaid and contracts ignored, a legal battle raced all the way to the Supreme Court, and, as she put it, lost. She painted the bureaucracy not as a dull machine, but as a battlefield where lives are the stakes. Food aid left to rot in storage, 500 tons of high-energy biscuits counting down to expiration while famine counts up its victims. And then came the fulcrum of the hearing, authority and transparency. Murray said the committee had pressed for information, hundreds of requests. She said they got obfuscation, delay, silence. The law demands notice, consultation, justification before an agency is collapsed into another, before a pillar of American soft power is toppled and folded into a new chain of command. Her message was clear. If the executive branch can impound funds without consequence, refuse documents without penalty, and reorganize the government without consent, then Congress is not a co-equal branch. It is a spectator. When she turned to the larger map, the lines grew sharper. a 91% cut to counter narcotics and law enforcement programs, a retreat from alliances, a vacuum ceding influence to China. These were not abstract metrics. They were the connective tissue of American leadership, the grants, training, and partnerships that prevent violence before it erupts, that advance research before crisis, that build relationships before war. She was asking a question that has hovered over Washington for decades. What is the cost when we dismantle the quiet engines of peace? Then the confrontation tightened to a single point of accountability. "Will you share the text and details," she asked, "of the arrangement with El Salvador, the funding, the terms, the mechanics of a deal that," she alleged, "reached far beyond public explanation?" Secretary Rubio's response was instantaneous and categorical. He disagreed with 99% of her indictment. "We've done nothing illegal," he said. He cited hundreds of briefings, asserted that requests are answered, promised the committee would have the information it needs. On the specifics, the El Salvador agreement, the office closures, the rescissions, he acknowledged funding flows and law enforcement assistance, insisted no U.S. residents were deported, and promised documents would come with the budget. Here was the moment of revelation. Two incompatible realities presented side by side, one in which Congress was circumvented, the law ignored, the humanitarian mission gutted, another in which the department acted lawfully, transparently, and within the ordinary turbulence of government reorganization. And in the gap between those realities stood the American viewer, listening for the weight of proof. This is where hearings matter, not because they settle truth in a single afternoon, but because they expose the struggle for it. Murray's charge invoked the deepest architecture of our republic, the Impoundment Control Act, the Anti-Deficiency Act, the power of the purse. Those aren't just statutes. They are guardrails built from the founding insight that liberty withers when the executive can spend, or refuse to spend, at will. If money appropriated by the people's representatives can be frozen by decree, the Constitution becomes a suggestion. If programs authorized in law can be nullified in practice, elections become a ritual. Rubio's defense invoked another cornerstone, the presumption of regular order, the reality that government is messy, complex, always in motion. He argued that assistance continues, that countries decide how to use it, that no one was unlawfully deported, that briefings were numerous, that documents would flow in time. It is the standard portrait of executive discretion, broad, pragmatic, self-justifying. But the question that Murray pressed, and that echoed throughout the exchange, is not whether discretion exists. It is whether discretion has devoured the law. What emerges from this fierce exchange is a stark measure of leadership. Leadership is not a flourish of authority. It is obedience to limits. It is the hard humility of submitting power to process, ambition to statute, ideology to evidence. And justice, in the realm of governance, is not a sentiment. It is the delivery of what Congress funded to the people who need it, on the timeline the law requires, with the proof the Constitution demands. The details Murray pursued, the number of offices to be eliminated, the justifications for layoffs, the text of agreements with foreign governments, the list of canceled contracts, might sound bureaucratic. They are not. They are the accountability trail. They are how we know whether dollars became meals, clinics, training, conflict prevention, or whether they became nothing at all. They are how we trace the life of a promise from appropriation to action. And when Murray asked her final question, not to the witness but to her colleagues, the hearing turned into a referendum. How long are we going to sit here and watch this silently? Are we going to roll over or assert the constitutional power of the purse? That is the real drama, because the separation of powers only exists when it is exercised. If committees shrug, oversight dies. If oversight dies, law becomes merely advice to power. In the end, the exchange between Patty Murray and Marco Rubio revealed a moral calculus as old as the Republic. Power will always argue for more power. Accountability must always answer. Between them stands the human cost: aid that feeds or spoils, programs that stabilize or vanish, partnerships that deter war or invite it. Between them stands the question of who we are: a nation ruled by laws, or a nation ruled by those who say, "Trust us," when the documents go missing. Let this be our measure. If we value American leadership, then we must defend the institutions that make it credible: lawful appropriations, transparent execution, and the oversight that binds ambition to duty. If we care about lives beyond our borders and the security within them that returns home to us, then we must insist that the promises made in our name are kept in our practice. This is the moral center of the moment. Government must not be a fortress of secrecy, but a steward of trust. When it fails that test, we must push back with subpoenas, with votes, with the relentless demand for facts. If this matters to you, if the fight for lawful, humane American leadership matters, then add your voice to ours. Subscribe to Liberal Line. Support our work. Help us follow the money, trace the paper, and hold power to the oath it swore. The Constitution is not self-executing. It needs witnesses. It needs you.